The mid to late 80s belonged to Ivan Lendl, world number one for more than 5 years.
Here's the set and match, Lendl.
Lendl won a total of 8 Grand Slam titles, 3 on the hard courts of the US Open, 3 on the clay at the French Open.
It's out. Lendl the champion.
And the last 2 at the Australian Open in 1989 and 1990.
There is a reason why they came later. Australian Open switched from grass to rebound ace, and the first tournament was in '88. I lost to Cash in the semifinals in 5 sets, and then the next 2 years I was able to win. And I wish it was always on rebound ace or a hard court like it is now.
There is one notable omission on the incredible CV of Ivan Lendl. In 14 attempts, he was never able to capture the Wimbledon men's singles title. Played on the hallowed grass of the All England club.
I tried to do everything I can and to win. Unfortunately, I didn't, but I lose no sleep over that, and people think I do.
Ivan Lendl dominated an entire era of tennis, crushed the world's best players, and held the #1 ranking for 270 weeks. Yet he never won the one tournament he wanted more than anything, Wimbledon. It wasn't just a missing trophy. It became an obsession that consumed years of his career, reshaped his entire training philosophy, and pushed him to the brink of breaking himself. He rebuilt his game from the ground up, skipped entire seasons, hired specialists, and redesigned his body for grass court glory. But no matter how hard he chased it, center court refused to let him in. Fans mocked him, critics called him cursed, and even his rivals whispered that he just wasn't built for the moment he wanted most. And beneath that long, painful chase lies a story almost no one talks about anymore. A story of pressure, reinvention, isolation, and the surprising twist that brought Lendl back into tennis years after the world had moved on. But to understand how a legend could dominate everything except the one stage that mattered, we have to go back to where it all began. Ivan Lendl's rise didn't look like the making of a future world beater. He wasn't the charismatic prodigy fans instantly adored, and he didn't possess the effortless flair of the players who dominated the spotlight. He grew up in Czechoslovakia under a rigid state-driven sports system where discipline mattered more than expression, and where emotions were treated as distractions, not assets. From an early age, coaches noticed something unusual about him. He didn't just outplay opponents, he outworked them, grinding them down with a seriousness that felt almost unnerving for a teenager. The Cold War backdrop added another layer to his story. Eastern European athletes always carried the weight of politics on their shoulders, and every match felt like a quiet test of national pride. Lendl didn't complain, didn't smile, didn't flinch. He simply pushed forward, intent on proving he belonged among the best players in the world. His early years on tour were marked by awkward press conferences, minimal fan connection, and a reputation for being too serious. But behind that awkwardness was a competitor who understood exactly who he was, a worker, a grinder, someone who would build his greatness brick by brick. While the tennis world was captivated by the charismatic chaos of McEnroe, the icy mystique of Borg, and the crowd-pleasing bravado of other stars, Lendl was carving his own path with a style that felt brutally efficient. He didn't charm audiences. He overwhelmed opponents. His powerful forehand, heavy topspin, and relentless court coverage were just beginning to show the outlines of something new, a modern style of baseline dominance that tennis hadn't fully seen yet. Lendl's rise happened quietly, almost stubbornly, as if he refused to wait for anyone to appreciate him. He climbed the rankings with a cold, methodical precision, surprising experts who doubted whether someone this controlled, this emotionless, could ever become a fan favorite or a long-term threat. But his climb was only the beginning, because once he reached the top levels of the game, the way he changed tennis would become the part no one could ignore. By the early 1980s, Ivan Lendl wasn't just rising through the rankings, he was quietly rewriting the sport in ways few players fully understood at the time. Tennis was still built around serve and volley artistry, touch shots, and a kind of improvisational flair that fans adored. But Lendl didn't fit that mold, and he didn't pretend to. Instead, he leaned into his strengths and engineered a new style of play built on raw power, heavy topspin, and relentless baseline pressure. What looked stiff or robotic to the crowd was actually the first glimpse of modern tennis taking form. Lendl approached the game like a scientist. He treated his body as a machine that could be optimized, tracked, and reshaped. While most players relied on instinct and talent, he brought in heart rate monitors, strict nutrition plans, and training regimens that looked more like Olympic preparation than anything happening in tennis. His intense conditioning was shocking at the time. Long-distance runs, strength cycles, precise recovery routines, all designed to outlast and outmuscle opponents in ways that felt almost unfair. Some players mocked him for it. They joked about his emotionless demeanor, called him a machine, and criticized his boring style. Fans who were used to big personalities didn't know what to make of someone who rarely showed emotion and never played to the crowd, but the results were impossible to ignore. Lendl wasn't chasing popularity, he was chasing domination. His forehand became one of the most feared weapons on tour, his baseline control suffocated aggressive players, and his fitness erased the dramatic five-set collapses that plagued many of his rivals. He didn't charm audiences, but he forced the sport to evolve. Younger players began copying his methods, adopting heavier training and more scientific preparation. Coaches studied his routines, trying to reverse engineer the secret to his durability. Without flashy theatrics or emotional meltdowns, Lendl was shaping the future of tennis in real time. But with all that success came a new kind of pressure, because the more he dominated, the more the spotlight turned toward the cold, quiet man who never reacted to victory or defeat. And once his biggest rival stepped into the picture, the tension around Lendl's icy persona would explode into something unforgettable. As Ivan Lendl climbed higher in the rankings, something strange happened. The better he became, the more resistance he faced from the crowds and the media. Tennis was entering a golden age of personalities. McEnroe's volcanic temper, Connors' street fighter swagger, Becker's teenage theatrics. Fans loved chaos, flair, and charisma. Lendl offered none of that. He walked onto the court like a man entering a laboratory, expressionless, focused, and determined to dismantle opponents point by point. To some, he looked emotionless. To others, he looked dangerous. The rivalry with John McEnroe became the perfect battleground for everything people felt about Lendl. McEnroe was loud, unpredictable, dramatic. Lendl was silent, controlled, and painfully methodical. Every time the two played, the contrast was so stark that the crowd instinctively sided with McEnroe, booing Lendl for being too quiet, too composed, too different. In major finals, fans didn't just cheer against him, they actively tried to rattle him, and Lendl, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction, only made the tension worse. Even when he beat the stars the crowd adored, he didn't celebrate. No roar, no fist pump, nothing. Reporters accused him of lacking personality. Commentators speculated that his stoicism made the sport less fun. But beneath that silent exterior was a competitor refusing to play a role just to be liked. Lendl didn't want attention, he wanted respect, and he knew the only way to get it was through domination, not theatrics. But that icy persona came with a cost. As the years went on, the villain label stuck to him more tightly than any ranking he held. Even when he reached #1 and collected major titles, the narrative never shifted. He wasn't the hero, he wasn't the artist, he wasn't the entertainer, he was the obstacle, the man fans rooted against, the champion no one embraced. And yet, for all the noise around him, nothing pushed the pressure heavier than the one storyline that followed him everywhere: Wimbledon. Every year he stepped onto the grass, the whispers grew louder, the scrutiny became harsher, and the weight of expectation dug deeper into him, and soon that pressure would collide with his greatest obsession in a way that changed everything. For Ivan Lendl, Wimbledon wasn't just another tournament. It was the one stage that refused to bow to him. He could dominate Roland Garros, crush the U.S. Open, outlast anyone in Australia, but the grass of the All England Club turned into his personal battlefield, and instead of avoiding it, he doubled down on the challenge with a level of obsession that shocked even his closest rivals. Every year, he convinced himself that this time would be different. This time, he would force Wimbledon to surrender. Lendl didn't just adjust his schedule, he rebuilt his identity. He skipped entire clay court seasons, sacrificing tournaments he could have easily won just to train on grass. He brought in specialists, studied movement patterns, and redesigned his game to be more aggressive at the net. He practiced serve and volley drills until his legs felt like concrete, determined to master a style that wasn't natural for him. Most players refine their strengths. Lendl tried to reprogram himself from scratch. The results were both impressive and heartbreaking. He reached the Wimbledon final twice in 1986 and 1987, each time standing one match away from rewriting his entire narrative. But both times, the trophy slipped through his fingers. Each loss made the next attempt heavier. The media mocked his yearly promises to figure grass out. Commentators said he looked uncomfortable on the surface, as if the grass itself resisted him. Even opponents whispered that no matter how much he trained, he just wasn't built for the lawns of London. Yet Lendl refused to quit. Every summer, he arrived in England early. Every year, he changed something new. Equipment, footwork, strategy, pacing. The obsession consumed everything. He played exhibition tournaments designed specifically to simulate Wimbledon conditions. He practiced in private sessions, trying to master low skids and awkward bounces. His entire season revolved around those 2 weeks in July. But there's only so long a body can withstand that level of pressure and reinvention. And just when it seemed like he might finally push through, when his game looked sharper, his serve heavier, his movement cleaner, his body began to give him warnings he couldn't ignore. Because the moment when it looked like the dream was finally within reach was exactly when everything started to fall apart. By the early 1990s, the cost of Lendl's relentless pursuit of dominance began to surface in ways he could no longer hide. His body, once the most finely conditioned machine in tennis, started to break down under years of punishing training. The back pain came first, sharp, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. For a player who relied on explosive rotation and heavy topspin, a compromised spine wasn't just a setback. It was a slow unraveling of the very game he had spent a decade perfecting. At the same time, tennis itself was shifting. A new wave of younger, faster, more fearless players arrived. Sampras with his effortless power, Agassi with his laser returns, Courier with his brutal athleticism. They weren't intimidated by Lendl's aura, and they didn't carry the scars of losing to him throughout the 80s. They attacked him, pushed him, made him feel just a half step slower than the machine he once was. Matches that Lendl used to control from the first rally now turned into battles he struggled to finish. He kept fighting, refusing to let go, but each season felt like a reminder that his window was closing. His training sessions grew shorter, his withdrawals became more frequent, and the fire that once fueled his transformation of the sport started to flicker. Even his famous discipline couldn't stop the decline. Lendl wasn't being defeated by any single opponent. He was being worn down by time, pain, and the massive expectations he had carried for too many years. When the end finally came, it wasn't with a dramatic farewell or a packed stadium cheering him into retirement. It was quiet, understated, almost hidden. He stepped away from the sport the same way he had entered it, without theatrics, without emotion, without asking for sympathy or celebration. One day he was a towering presence in the game. The next, he was simply gone, receding from the public eye as if he had never been the world's most dominant force. And the silence that followed was almost eerie. The tennis world moved on quickly, swept up by new rivalries, new faces, new narratives. For a man who had ruled the sport with such unforgiving consistency, the sudden lack of recognition was a sharp contrast to the years he spent at the top. But what no one expected was that Lendl's story wasn't finished, not even close. Because after disappearing from the game, he would return in a way that no one saw coming, and shape a new champion who would finally conquer the stage he never could. For years after retiring, Ivan Lendl lived almost like a ghost in the tennis world, quiet, distant, and comfortably removed from the spotlight he never enjoyed. He focused on his family, his private life, and a growing obsession with golf. To many fans, it looked like he had closed the tennis chapter for good, and honestly, no one blamed him. He had spent years under intense scrutiny, always chasing perfection, always being judged. Stepping away seemed like the first time he allowed himself to breathe. But something pulled him back, not for fame, not for nostalgia, and definitely not for redemption. What drew him in was a young talent who reminded him of everything he once valued: discipline, precision, an iron will, and a desire to build greatness through hard work rather than theatrics. That player was Andy Murray. When Lendl agreed to coach Murray, critics reacted with confusion. Murray was emotional, fiery, often overwhelmed by the weight of British expectations. Lendl was the opposite: controlled, cold, methodical. The pairing looked strange on paper, but there was a deeper logic behind it. Murray didn't need a cheerleader. He needed someone who had lived through pressure heavier than anything he would ever face. Someone who understood the loneliness of chasing a dream no one believed you could achieve. Under Lendl's guidance, Murray transformed. The emotional outbursts became less frequent. The self-doubt faded. The physical preparation sharpened. Lendl brought structure, clarity, and a mindset that mirrored his own. No excuses, no distractions, no wavering under pressure. Murray didn't just become better, he became tougher, colder, and unshakably focused. And then, in 2013, the moment came. Andy Murray stepped onto center court, Lendl's old battleground, and did what Ivan himself had spent a career chasing. He won Wimbledon. He didn't just win it. He dominated the final in a performance built on discipline and relentless pressure, two qualities Lendl had drilled into him from day one. As Murray lifted the trophy, the cameras cut to Lendl, who stood still, expressionless, classic Lendl fashion. But for those who knew his history, that moment carried a quiet irony. The man who never conquered Wimbledon had finally shaped the champion who would. It wasn't his trophy, but in a way, it was his redemption. And the path from forgotten legend to mentor of a Wimbledon winner revealed a final truth about Lendl, one that would reshape how tennis remembers him. By the time Andy Murray lifted the Wimbledon trophy with Ivan Lendl watching from the player box, something subtle but powerful shifted in the way people viewed Lendl's career. For decades, he had been defined by what he didn't win, overshadowed by his stoic personality and misunderstood intensity. Fans preferred the flashy champions, the emotional icons, the entertainers who gave them drama. Lendl, with his quiet dominance and machine-like discipline, never fit the narrative people wanted. But slowly, the sport began to realize that they had overlooked one of the most influential players in tennis history. Lendl didn't just win titles, he reshaped the entire blueprint of modern tennis. His commitment to fitness, data-driven training, diet, and psychological discipline became the foundation for the Federer, Nadal, Djokovic era. Everything that defines the sport today, long rallies, baseline power, scientific preparation, traces back to the principles he introduced at a time when most players were still improvising their careers. What once made him boring now looks like pure innovation. His reputation as a villain, too, has softened with time. Fans who once booed him at Wimbledon now look back with a kind of respect that didn't exist during his prime. They see the pressure he carried as an Eastern European athlete during the Cold War, the expectations he bore as the #1 player, and the years he sacrificed chasing a dream that always slipped just beyond his fingertips. They see a man who never looked for applause, never built a brand around charisma, and never pretended to be something he wasn't. And maybe that's why his story hits harder today. Lendl wasn't a mythic hero or a crowd-pleasing entertainer. He was a worker, a builder, someone who quietly laid the foundation for the sport's future, only to watch others collect the spotlight. His failure to win Wimbledon, a wound that once defined him, now feels like part of what makes his journey so human. The obsession, the heartbreak, the reinvention. It all shaped a legacy deeper than a trophy could ever offer. As years pass, the memory of the 80s grows blurrier, and the highlights fade into grainy footage. Many casual fans barely know his name. But those who study the sport, those who understand what truly changed the game, recognize that without Lendl, tennis might look completely different today. He was never the loudest, never the flashiest, never the crowd favorite, but he was the force that pushed tennis into the future. And that's why Ivan Lendl Lendl, once overlooked and misunderstood, stands today as a legend the sport should never forget.